So we'll go ahead and start from left to right. So I'll go first. I'm Trevor McGough. I'm with ClearEdge 3D and I'm the product manager. So yeah, I'm the one who gets to make the fun software that everyone usually gets to use. So with that, Greg.
Thanks, Trevor. Greg Hale, the owner and executionist of Hale Technology and Practice. We've been in business since 2014, so just coming right up on 11 years. Nice magic number with a lot of history in the 3D modeling space, 3D scanning space, and a lot of consulting for clients that are looking to get into those kinds of spaces.
Perfect. Ted?
So Ted Moore, running operations over at CADnetics. CADnetics is based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but we're highly remote, so we've got folks all over the country. We've been doing this for 30 years, just over 30 years actually, as a business. I myself have been involved in reality capture for over 15. Had the pleasure of knowing a lot of folks for a long time, and very excited today to share some of what we've learned.
Perfect. And Jaco?
Yeah, Jaco, I'm representing Gelbs, and this is my third company working in this. I've been at it for 7-8 years approximately. Been a bit of a pioneer or a trailblazer here in Finland. We use latest tech from Regal. We did it 7 years ago, and we now with Gelbs we just invested in latest tech from Regal as terrestrial scanners and drone scanners. And yeah, it's been a fun 7 years doing this, just going through stuff that people don't actually think about or do, or solving problems. That's my main attraction in this field of work.
Perfect. And again, realize I forgot to hit the share button there, so hopefully now everyone can see my screen. And so see the slides, and there we go. So let's go ahead and dive right into the meat of our webinar for today. I'm gonna go ahead and do this. So yeah, a little bit about the webinar workflow we have for today. So part 1 will be pre-project planning best practices. Then we'll move into part 2. We'll do reality capture lessons learned to maximize field efficiency. And then finally, we'll round it out with part 3, data processing and 3D modeling tips for best-in-class deliverables. So let's go ahead and jump in and talk a little bit about best project planning, or pre-project planning best practices, and why that's actually pre-engineering best practices instead with Jaco. So Jaco, take it away.
Yeah, this is a little bit of a forgotten term. So engineering and designing that happens, actually we need to plan for that too. So pre-engineering, why is it important? It's not about designing or doing actual engineering. It's about thinking about possibilities, risks. It's not about how we model things. It's not about how we scan things. Foremost, it's a lot of other things. It's weather conditions, finances, human resources. It's basically anything you can think about that would affect the project. So thinking about these things beforehand as much as possible obviously improves your efficiency if you plan for mistakes that you're going to make, whether it's by you or by someone else. And this enables you to optimize your resources in all fields to get the most out of the resource you have available. So thinking about and planning ahead is because we're actually providing pre-engineering data some of the time. So designers are doing 3D models or buildings or plans for future renovations or stuff like that. We're providing data for them. So that's actually the pre-engineering part of their engineering part. And this, I've found that the more data you have, the more things you think about, what's going to happen, what could happen, what should happen, really increases the chances of you successfully finishing the project in time and hopefully earlier than you were supposed to.
Yeah. And so to that end,
and obviously, if the other panelists have anything to add.
No, I guess Greg or Ted, anything you'd like to add, part of that.
Yeah, I think it is a great point. I mean, a lot of what we're doing is we're going to talk about, the project planning from our own perspective, but what we engage in a lot is helping others pre-plan for their projects as well. So just sort of a downstream impact to keep in mind.
Yeah, and just to complement that, as people kind of come into and dig into questions about, what it is we can and can't do, often they typically come in with the wrong questions, and we, with our background and expertise, can help lead them in the right direction to find the best solutions for the things that they're trying to solve.
Yep. And so one thing, especially I've known this being the product manager, is starting, those key questions we ask. And, to that end, we got Ted to talk about a little bit about those questions right here. So Ted.
Oh, yeah. So I've written a lot of proposals, a lot of scopes. I've had countless scoping calls with clients, all different types of clients. And no matter how thorough you think you are, there's always some issue with what you're able to articulate onto a piece of paper to what is understood in the expectation setting associated with it, right? So when I talk about scope and deliverables, you've got to do everything you can to document all the things that you're about to produce, set those expectations. But the one thing I've always found successful is if I can do a really good job at understanding the why and the who, I call it. So the why is the first thing that I focus on, is why are we about to perform this work, right? What's the end goal? And the better that I can take that and just put that in general terminology, layman's, terms out there, and say, this is what we want to accomplish by the work that we're about to perform. I found that empowers the teams that are out there working. It helps the clients look at it and say, actually, now that you mentioned that, we also want to do X, right? Which helps you then to start to dive into questions that wouldn't happen if you just took the order, right? If I said, okay, you want this, you want a floor plan? Great. Here's what you need for the floor plan, what's your accuracy, all that. However, if I find out, oh, you're going to use this floor plan because you're going to be doing adaptive reuse of a lab space, right? Then we can start talking about, okay, well, what about some of the utility laterals, right, that are coming in from the cup building? And, do you need to have those penetration points, and what level of accuracy? So now I can start really expanding on the understanding of the scope because I know why they're asking for what they're asking. The other part that's absolutely critical is who. I can tell you from experience, been burned so many times because we scoped, I found out what the why was. We talked with the project manager or the project executive that was issuing the contract. They executed it. We got out there, did the work, delivered exactly what they expected. They took that and turned it over into their modeling teams or their detailing teams. And detailing team says, well, what about this, right? Or why isn't it in this format? Or we can't use it like that. And the reason behind that is the person that I was talking with, they did their best to express what it was that they wanted, but they were speaking on behalf of another team that unless I find out who's going to be using the product, a lot of times you find out too late, right? So once I do find out who's going to be using it, I do ask for an audience with that person, even if it's after a award, right? I want to sit down and talk before we get out to the site and say, you're about to consume what I'm going to provide. This is what we're going to do. Do we need to make any accommodations now and adjustments? In a lot of cases, you can adjust scope, right, within tolerances that aren't going to cost you a lot more, and it improves the end product and the satisfaction of the team that's about to consume it.
Yeah, excellent. Greg, Yako, anything? Yeah.
I had a one. I had a worst case scenario in this one. We mapped out a school. They ordered us a full BIM model of the whole school. I did 2 months of work on that model from point cloud, and we handed it over. We had a meeting to close the project, and then the architect says, okay, good, now we can start modeling this building. I'm like, what? Yeah, we're gonna model the whole thing again. I'm like, what? I was just speechless. I'm like, I did 2 months of works on this to make your life easier, and now you're gonna just redo everything I did. And yeah, we're gonna make it straight lines, and we're gonna make it like this. I'm like, okay, and you ask for an as-built model with total specs on what everything should be, and then you're just going to remake a worse version of the same thing. Like it was so frustrating. So, and this was just that it was just mapped out. The end user was mapped out poorly. So the project leader didn't actually connect us together, and it would have been a 2-minute phone call with the architect that's saying that, okay, yeah.
No, and I think everyone agrees here, just sometimes having those the criticality of having those conversations with, I think it's Ted, the who is, I think, something that's extremely and also laying things out in plain English,
Yeah.
I think those are some very critical things, for when you're delivering, or coming up with your deliverable. And to that end, Greg, I think, brings up some great points on some additional kind of tacking on to that.
I think just as a little sidebar to that conversation, I don't think we covered anywhere else in here. With some of the why in those questions, accuracy comes up a lot. And really, when it comes out to gathering your measurements, the accuracy never gets better than when you first take it, right? So it's always going to go down and get less and less and less. Kind of the more iterations you look at that information, the less and less accurate it's going to be. So having some of the indications on why you're using that data and the applications kind of delineates and helps you define what the accuracy needs to be to serve all of those purposes. So definitely a very important questions. And then some of the intangibles we've got here in the list. I think the most common thing that we all see as scanning and modeling providers is, I have a building, it's 20,000 square feet, it's 100,000 square feet. How much is it going to cost? Like those are the number one question, but with very little context. So it just leads to a lot of questions for us, because it could be 5 cents a square foot, it could be $1 a square foot, depending upon what the answer to those questions are. So some simple things, do we have a place to store equipment on site? So if it's multi-day, multi-week scanning, do we have a place that we can store it, lock it, as opposed to shifting all of our equipment back and forth, to wherever it might go? Shift planning is important. I have been on several projects where, we thought we had it in place. To Ted's point, we're dealing with a project manager who may not be dealing directly with a plant. We get there, we get on site, we say, hey, we were told to be here. It's Christmas week. They told it can be really quiet, and they go, no, it's not going to be quiet here. This is the busiest week of the year. We've got inventory that we need to run, and we got forklifts everywhere. It's like, you can't be here. So, even with what you thought was the best plan and communication, it can shift. So making that and being adamant about understanding whether you need opposite shifts, whether it's a night shift or lunch shifts or, whatever that might be, is really critical and helpful. And then access is often overlooked, especially with, sensitive areas where basically every room is locked or you have key card access. That can slow down operations like crazy. It can either easily double or triple the time it takes on a site to capture that data. And that, within the first couple of days, you've blown your whole budget on capturing the data that you've got there. So making sure people have keys or get you security access and going through all the hoops ahead of time to get all those avenues paid for you, just pays dividends once you get out on site, and kind of keeps things flowing well without having to have those difficult conversations, like, hey, not having access on the site really caused us to double our work, and so we're asking for additional fee. And those are not fun conversations to have, because nobody really anticipates that, and that can happen from day one.
Yeah.
So those are some of the tricks there to dive into, when you're trying to get site access and ask some of those questions.
Yeah. And just on a little bit more on the humorous note on the access side, I think I learned this one from you, Greg, is the importance of including a doorstop in your scanning kit. That was one of those ones that, amazing how useful that is, especially when you're scanning those areas where you need to link two different portions of the building, or just so you don't have to hold the door open. So again, learned that one from you, I'm pretty sure.
A doorstop and a safety vest. You get in just about anywhere with the safety vest.
Skeleton key to life. And continuing on, kind of again, these things that we need, as we're getting set up for our project. I think another key one is also, talking a little bit about what documentation we have.
Right. So it's of course almost always one of the first questions that we ask is like, what documentation do you have? more often than not, that's the reason we're getting hired to scan in the first place, is like we have very poor documentation. We just don't really have what you need. But it actually pays to ask that same question 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, or just keep asking different people, because all of a sudden this, like, someone pops up and says, oh yeah, I've got this back in the corner in the desk. I've had this for years. And once you have that, it may not negate the need for scanning per se, but it starts to inform that design intent or construction intent behind that information that you're trying to pull together with more accurate information. And so keep asking those questions, and then gather everything you can get your hands on. Even simple things, just like getting the address and looking up the map and just getting an aerial or a street view on that site, just gives you better context for what's going on there. Occasionally there are 3D models out there. It happens, we know, often, especially when we're doing as-built, so those are not accurate, but they still provide that context for us to, essentially go that next step and create these 3D models that are not only more accurate in their geometry, but also with that intent of what that information is behind the content. So even in a rare case, we'll see past laser scan data. If someone's got some old scans, they might have been from a different point in time or a part of a project, but they are beneficial and useful, whether it's for alignment or, again, just context. And then existing survey control. This can save definitely some time on site. It still needs to be validated, but when you have kind of a known network on site, it can save time for everybody to just jump in there, stay on the same coordinate system, and really work within the overall system of a campus or a project. So all the good things to ask for and try to collect, on the front end before you get started.
And again, with the documentation, one of the more, or actually, go ahead, Ted.
Real quick, just a couple things. Greg makes tremendous points here, and you'd be surprised how often you can find even a rudimentary map of the facility or floor plan layout, especially as real estate transactions go more online, right? We can, just like you can go look at houses through the MLS, a lot of commercial properties are listed, and they at least have like a fire escape plan or something that they're posting to give a general idea of the layout. It's not accurate, that's why you're being called out there, but it gives you something to give an idea. You can find a lot of that online. So that is a great one, Greg.
Yeah, no, and again, love having documentation. And even while I'm scanning, I found, just writing down, making little X's on the plan about where I'm doing my scans, that saved me more than once when I'm trying to go back through and try to figure out what belongs where. But nothing, in my opinion, can take the place of actually, going up on site and kind of doing that initial walkthrough. And for that, I think, Jaco, you have some points.
Yeah, to the last conversation, bad documentation is better than no documentation, by far. So that's what we're trying to update. But yeah, I don't like to go blind on sites. I just I need to visit it. I need to see something. Of course, if it's like in this case, in the picture, it was a completely renovated, under renovation. A few general shots gave me an idea of the space, so I didn't walk. But when I arrive on site, I always try to walk the site with the customer or representative of the customer, and trying to get those little extra info on what you're actually interested in here. So because this affects the whole workflow of laser scanning. So if you're interested in the minuscule pipe work or openings or whatever, if it's just a general, it's so much various that what are you trying to measure and how it affects the whole project, because we can't promise things that, okay, we will scan this and they have this picture in their head that, okay, everything around it will be in the data. It is in the data, but it might not be usable if we haven't paid attention to it when we're doing this. And we talked about the access already, but ensure that you have the keys or you have access to all the areas when you're scanning. So there might be, okay, someone did a concrete floor the day before. Okay, you can't go there. How am I supposed to map it? So plan those ahead. So trying to get as much as info at what's happening on site before and during when you first arrive at the scene. And these active sites are a fun place to work by any definition. And I always like to be so that there's like, I'm AAA class when I go. So I wear the safety glasses, wear the head, my helmet, even like basically on break periods or break areas. That's only place I don't wear those. But being sort of professional there, even though you see people around you not wearing their protective gear or anything, still do it yourself. A lot of places that I have done scans are industrial or commercial areas where, for example, active factories. And especially in those, it's really important that you find out about the safety trainings. So they might be just a 20-minute course online that you can do, and then it's done. That's the best case scenario. But it might take, even if you don't do those in time and plan ahead, it might take 2 hours of your site visit. It might be the first 2 hours you're just sitting there listening to the safety instructions that you should have done in advance, and you haven't planned for that 2 hours, and you just lost a huge amount of effective work time for that. And it's good to, moving on to the next one, that it's good to have the staff also, the workers, everyone know that you're there. So know that, okay, for example, forklift drivers in factories, they're just, if they find the right person, they're just maniacs going with the forklift, and it's not funny if a forklift comes and takes up you and the scanner from around the corner. So having people know that you are there is, and we have especially do this with the drone. So we have all the permits, we can fly without any announcements other than those flight announcements, but it's still in good behavior that you inform that you're there, even though people might even need to know. And this brings me to the respect on the workers on the site. So do not try to dictate your own, like, okay, I need to go to this room now. I want to get out. I need to do this now. Try to like ease yourself in there and try to plan ahead. Okay, you see people working 2, 4 rooms ahead. You see they're doing something there. Okay, put the scanner up, start the scan, walk up there, have a talk with them. Okay, I'm going there now. You guys take a long time still. What if I go around there and then I come here? So try to like negotiate your way through the site rather than just going and I'm here to do my job and get out of the way. So this is what I found, that it works best when you talk to the people and you actually respect that they're also there to do their job.
I think again that the amount of times I've nearly had to use my body to shield the scanner has been non-zero. And again, I'd be curious on the panelists to make it a little more interactive. What's the farthest distance someone has traveled to a scanning job and forgot the keys for the site? So I'd be a little curious to know that answer from everyone. But again, I think being on site is one of those things, a little bit of respect, goes a long way, and making sure everything runs smoothly. Again, we're all here to do the job, and being a little bit respectful makes everyone's job, again, exponentially easier. So on that end, a little bit about Greg, kind of continuing on with the things, just being prepared for on the on-site stuff.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. I do want to just tack on one thing. Ted mentioned it before, the high-vis vest is like one of the best investments you can make. So even if you're a one-man show or just a startup, like first thing to do is buy a high-vis vest, put a logo on it, make it look official, and you will have access to anything you want.
Skeleton key to life.
Definitely invest in that if you do not have one already, as opposed to the Home Depot or Lowe's out of the box Viz vest. Definitely get something professional. So just a couple other things. This comes down to just some good planning. As you deal with more sophisticated clients, you'll find that typical announcements have to go out, kind of stating we have some scan techs on site or some drone techs. Here's what they're going to be doing. Here's what the equipment looks like. What that really helps do is speed up your process as well, because you'll start to get less questions, a lot less of those diversions of like, hey, what are you doing? Hey, can I be in this movie? All of those questions that come up along the process that, they're okay, but they can definitely slow that process down. So put that plan out there, kind of get it in front of everybody ahead of time, and just make them aware of the operations that are going to be happening in that time frame.
Perfect. Okay. I guess Ted, Yako, anything you guys would like to add on in addition to that?
I'll tell you, you're recording this, so I would just encourage everybody to come back to this one because Greg has a lot of great info in the bullets here. But no, we've got so much more to cover too.
Yeah, no, understood.
Control
So with that,
points are one, try to plan those control points so that they stay there. So making temporary control points as the worst decision that every surveyor makes, that, okay, this is fine now, but make sure those last. So prep those surfaces, think about that, okay, you just put a sticker on a wall and then the painter comes the next day and oof, it goes over, and then you're back on the site six months later and you're like, okay, I had some control points here. Yeah, they're all gone.
no, that's funny how in life the things we think of, yeah, no, understood. So let me go ahead. Let's go actually move on to step 2, which is going to be reality capture lessons learned to maximize field efficiency. This is even the one I'm especially interested in. So Ted, let's kick us off.
Oh, geez, this one, so really gets traveling abroad. When we were talking through sort of what we're going to get into in the webinar, there were some really exciting stories that I think we all have of moving around with equipment. One that I want to share, it didn't happen to me personally, but early stage of mobile scanners, when people had the trolleys that they were pushing around, they had IMUs in them that they were getting from, other sources. They weren't being built specifically for that equipment. So a friend of mine was taking a trolley system into a country that didn't have like the best political relationship with us. And as they were going in, they found out that one of the IMUs on the system is also an IMU that's used in missiles. So caused a little bit of a stir right there. And I think that person ended up walking away from the situation. They had an option to sort of just scoot out the door and get back on a flight and get out of there. They did that, and I think they left the equipment. So that's really extreme. I don't think you run into that very much. But it is important to know that if you're going to cross borders, right, think ahead, because this equipment is very expensive. Countries don't like expensive equipment coming and going without getting a piece of tax on it. One of the things that I like to do if I'm going to work internationally is I try to leave my kit at home. I either reach out to the area, try to find out if somebody rents equipment out there. If I can't find rentals, then what I'll do is I'll look for a partner, maybe somebody that maybe I want to do the work. It's critical for me to do it. That's why I'm out there. But I'll even hire their crew to come and shadow me, and I'll use their equipment, or I'll treat them as an extension of my crew, and they work. That way I don't have to worry about, expensive gear coming and going and some of the potential issues that can arise with that.
Makes sense. Again, great practical information. And, next up, kind of continuing on and kind of some of the more practicalities of data collection. Back to you, Greg.
Yeah, this is just a bit of thinking ahead. Something that often gets overlooked is, really worrying about the field operations altogether. But what happens after the field operations? You basically got to pull all this data together. So having a plan for how that data is going to be pulled together really informs some of the site logistics as well. So if you're doing a combination of mobile scanning and targeted scanning, cloud-to-cloud scanning, drone work, all of these different tools and data sets, how are you going to bring that together? So having a plan and a map for that influences the process for that field work. Again, that pays the dividends for making, ensuring a good flow process when you get back.
Ted got out there.
Back to the office or handing that data off to the post-processing team and pulling that together. And even thinking about the modeling workflows and the scope of work, focusing that particular site work on the areas of interest and less so on the areas of interest that are not so much there. So really understanding the project in the targeted areas and focusing on those really influences that site work plan.
Excellent. And I think one of the most key things that's actually near and dear to my heart, especially as a software vendor, is, yes, to you, Ted.
Oh yeah, the right tool for the right job. We've been talking about this for a long time. So you notice there isn't a little sticker on there that says new. So sorry for that, but it's becoming more and more relevant. I mean, right now, there's well over 100 different unique hardware and software platforms that you could deploy, whether it's drones or mobile units or static-based terrestrial, or different cameras, and then the plethora of software that comes with it. One of the challenges is that you can't have it all, unfortunately. Even the biggest companies out there don't have every type of toolkit to execute a project correctly. So how do you do that? If I'm going to enter into a distribution center that's 1 million square feet and it's a wide open warehouse, and we need to scan that, and what I have is a static terrestrial unit. That's not the best tool for the job, right? But could I do it? Sure. Am I going to probably cost more, or pass that on to my client, or be uncompetitive for the project? Definitely, right? So what I do, because I can't own everything, is I make a lot of friends. Now it has its own sort of challenges that comes with it. But if I know that I'm not going to be buying a mobile unit anytime soon, I usually do talk to the vendor of that mobile unit. I find out who they trust or who they could refer me to in a particular region. And then I get to know them and make sure that they do great work and that they're a company that I can, partner with in the future, so that when I do walk into that project and I'm brought to the table, I say, you know what, I could do it with the unit that I have. However, I know that there's a better unit, and I know somebody that will partner with me to execute it. And I can bring them in, and I can then gain the opportunity to use that right tool for the right job. I think that there's an entirely, separate webinar series that you can do on qualifying partners and how to set expectations and scoping and pre-engineering right with them, because those kind of things can go sideways too, even in the best situations. But that I can't compel everyone enough. Get out there, start networking, build a good resource group that you can lean on, that has stuff that can complement you.
Excellent. And again, I think industry reputations and cultivating a great one. And again, part of that is just, swing it back to you, Jocko, is?
Yeah, we talked about that a few slides ago, about those planning those sites and planning how you're going to do it and how you're going to scan them, and those methods affect the actual workflow. And residential sites are like a whole other thing, so they require a little bit of special handling. So understanding that people live there, they have their privacy, they except for example, I'm from Finland, and we have this reputation that we keep our personal space. Even if we have to stand in the rain, we won't stand next to someone in the bus stop. So we don't actually like people coming close to us, or that's the usual, that's the norm here. And strange people walking around our neighborhood. And of course, this puts you in this position that when you're trying to do work in someone's, let's say you're doing a residential building, apartment buildings, you need to pay extra attention to being polite, being professional, of course, and answering a few questions. You can't go around that. And you have to give the impression that, okay, I'm doing this for your benefit also, not just, this saves time on your renovation project. This helps the whole project move forward a lot faster. And give a little bit of a personal touch to it, so that you're not just a faceless drone that's here just to do its job like a robot there. And just being like, humor the people a little bit. And other like technical things are access can be a little bit difficult, and sometimes very difficult. So thinking about, okay, you have a big apartment building and there's 60 apartments in a level, and you mapped ahead how you're going to move from room to room. Okay, what if you skip a room? Are you going to circle back with the scanner? You're going to make a jump from the other side of the floor to that one, or how you're going to do it? So you can't plan for that. People just don't answer their door, or they don't want you in there. So you just can't get access. And so you need to plan ahead for that. So how you're going to deal with those jumps and that extra step of work during registration and compiling the data. And the documentation that we talked about earlier is also here. For example, here in Finland, when we have those pre-war buildings, and usually in the government databases is that, okay, all pictures, all drawings, everything technical related to this building is destroyed in the bombings. So there's no documentation, period. Or the documentation is just, well, it's a piece of paper, or it's moldy in some basement and nobody even knows about it. You find it during the scan, so there's an old box in there. But yeah, don't expect any good documentation, especially on old buildings. So
yes. And one thing I've learned on a practical note is when you're scanning in a residential area, don't say, oh yeah, this is my laser. People's eyes tend to go a little bit wide on that one. But
yeah,
another key,
I had an old lady come to me and with a cat. So she was going to walk her cat outside, and she was very concerned that her cat goes blind because I mentioned the laser. So yeah.
Fun times. But one of the key, also actually another fun one, is setting targets on site. Which is people think they're soccer balls. I've had them get kicked, but that aside, Greg.
You here, setting out reference spheres and targets on a site with a lot of high school kids is a bad idea. There's a little something I have a pet peeve of with a lot of the scan providers and their salesmen. Over the years, targetless registration has kind of come about, and it's very robust at this point, but it still does not solve every situation. So you'll find, pretty much any professional laser scan provider will have a set of targets, and the most common is really just survey points. You'll hear it over and over again, setting control points or survey points, and those can be any manner of that. And that's really all these are, different kinds of artificial references to use that help you pull together this data in a very accurate form. And there's lots of situations where this cloud-to-cloud and targetless registration will work, and a lot of situations where it will not. And so some of those, when you start to come across a lot of glass, buildings, whether it's a skyscraper or just a facility with a lot of curtain wall and glass on the outside, it can cause lots of difficulty with pulling those things together, or places with lots of mirrors, or even stainless, like a food production facility. And you get a lot of reflections in that scan data. It really just kind of throws it off. Sometimes not a ton, but just enough to kind of really mess up your process. Another interesting one is water. So if it's a scan outside and you've got rain the previous day, now all of a sudden you have a lot of puddles to deal with, and that can throw off things as well. So even in areas where you think it's going to be really easy and reliable, it helps to have kind of that plan B, or these artificial references to help pull together scan data. Another common one is roofs. There doesn't tend to be a lot of artificial objects on a roof surface to pull together this information in a good format. So think about those things. Have some backups on hand, whether it be spheres or checkerboard targets or some kind of survey points. Some of the smaller scanners will use the April tags, even photography targets for these things. So play those into your process and always have that plan B and plan C for how you might pull this information together. I kind of liken it to, a contractor who's going to come on site. He's going to use his drill for just about everything. But then there are certain situations where that drill just won't fit in there, and you need an actual screwdriver. If you don't have that screwdriver in your bag, you're going to be really wanting one to get the job done. Otherwise, you could be SOL.
Yeah. And even worse is when you tend to leave that screwdriver laying around on site and then it disappears. And so to that end, making sure you grab your stuff.
Yep. So there's kind of a wrap up to all of these. We put out a lot of these tips, and it's not because we're the smartest people in the world. It's probably because we've screwed this up more times than most of you have. So we're throwing these tips out there so you don't have to go through those roadblocks and speed bumps with your process. So as you often travel to a site, you're often remote. So you're collecting your scan equipment, all the stuff that comes along with it. And one of those first things is check your data before you leave. Instead of just saying, hey, I really hope it all saved to a hard drive or whatever format that is, find a way to at least check it. Make sure it's not corrupt, so that you don't get back to the office, throw it in the computer and oh shoot, half of my scans aren't good. even one of them or two of them can be detrimental to the project. So at least getting some reassurance that you have the data that you need before you leave. And you want to do that before you kind of tear down all of the setup that you have. So if you had particular targets or checkerboards or spheres, or like you name it, any of that equipment that you've used out on the site, like have your checklist, and don't only use your checklist when you like pack up at the office to go to the site. Like use it before you leave the site to make sure you have everything before you get back. You know, again, these are things that myself and my team have screwed up over the years. So, you know, having a good process in place is going to save you, you know, a bit of headache to go through these things.
Oh, perfect. And so assuming everything goes well on site, then we have the next piece, which is the one where specialty clearance comes in, data processing and 3D modeling. Woo! Ted, kick us off.
Will do. All right. So you're going to get involved in a big project. If you're not already, eventually you will. And it's very intimidating, right? Especially when you get out there in site, you see something so big. So just like Greg was talking about breaking, like pre-planning your registration and sort of thinking ahead and saying, how are we going to break this up for registration? I like to do that on the post-processing as well. So the big project comes in, I've got somebody and they say, how do I even know how to get this done? I'll give a project manager, 2,000 hours to get a project modeled. It's very difficult if you're just trying to look at it as one line item. So I like to break it up into pieces. And I usually work with people to almost make a Gantt chart of it and say, how are we going to break this down? Are we going to do it by system, by locations? I try to keep it into groups of 40, 50 hours, and then give them the ability to go through and track that so that they can make sure that they're on track to complete the project. And it makes it a little bit easier. You're taking one massive project and you're turning it into 30 small projects. Then what I like to do is make sure that we're QAing as we go. It can be very easy to get started and to just start blasting away at everything and creating content and moving through and then checking at the end because, QA's at the end. Let's make sure it was done right. And you find out that had you adjusted something at the very beginning, you could have saved yourself a lot of time. So I make it a point that once we break it down, we want to QA those individual systems, those specific areas, so that we can learn the lessons early, teach the team that's working on the project, and then correct them going forward so that we're not just building and then having to redo the work. Then, as I mentioned, when you break it down like that, it's much easier to hit schedule or to find out early on that you're going to miss schedule, right? It's always a hard conversation if something's going to take longer and you're going to miss a deadline. It's much harder to have that conversation when somebody was expecting you to have something turned over that morning and you're showing up and saying, oh, well, actually, I'm a little bit behind. It's going to be another week, and then it's just constant slippage. If you have the entire thing broken down, you're a third of the way through it and you see that you're trending a little bit behind. Now you can have conversations that are much more constructive and say, you know what, this is taking longer. We're implementing steps to try to improve that. However, anticipating that we don't get back on track, how can we make this right and mitigate any of the negative exposure for you? Is there a way that we could phase the deliverables in? You'd be surprised how many times they say, oh yeah, actually the first floor is where we're starting. We're not even going to get to that next floor for 3 weeks. So can you just get us that? Perfect. That way you're having that conversation weeks before you're going to be delivering anything, and just allows you to be proactive and really do an amazing job at retaining good relationships.
Oh, again, beautifully put. But and one of the key things, especially for tackling those projects, and again, because I thought the whale with whale on the plate was kind of funny, making sure you have the right size fork and knife. And so for that, I think Jaka talking a little bit about the hardware side of things.
Yeah. I don't know if people know about, but Regal, for example, Regal scanners produce a lot of data. So they produce about 20 gigabytes per hour raw data, and this multiplies by how much you process it. So the project, rather than deleting points and filtering, would decrease the size, it actually increases. And now you have a situation where you have a lot of scans, you have done a lot of scans, and you have a lot of data, but you're losing time that you gained with those pre-engineering tricks that you did and thinking ahead. Now you're losing time because you can't process the data as fast as you would want to. And a lot of times this comes from inefficient hardware. So making sure that your hardware matches the scope that you're working in. So don't try to do that with the office laptop. It will fly out the window like a drone if you're trying to open up huge clouds and do a lot of normal calculations or basically anything CPU heavy. And so for example, we have solved this problem with a local server that runs in our office. So it distributes resources according to needs. This might not be the best case for everyone, but for example, in our drone workflow, we have a lot of trajectory calculations, the flight paths, and those are pretty heavy calculations on long flights and big projects. So the program actually distributes it to every computer, and it takes a little bit out of seeing you're typing those emails and suddenly your computer goes up, the processor goes up. It takes a little bit of that. You're not using it. I'm gonna loan it for a while and use it for this. And it's not all about the hardware. It's about the people too. So when we were updating our equipment here in the office, we, for example, trying to skimp out, saving like 100 euros on a monitor was actually like would cost us money in the next 5 years. So refresh rates, stuff like that, they cause headaches. Bad chairs cause back pain. Tired people they're not good workers. You have a top of the line PC working at maximum capacity, and you have a sleepy worker working that computer. It's no use. So think about those and do not skimp out on these, since we have a saying in Finland that poor people don't have the option of buying cheap. So buying $20 shoes every 6 months rather than spending the 100 and wearing them for 10 years. So which one is cheaper? But yeah, that's one thing to think about and plan ahead again in this. And here in the picture, we have this neighborhood here and 6 billion points. Producing a 1 point cloud from that sums up to about a 300 gigabyte folder of E57 without any extra attributes, just the location data. That's 300 gigabytes. So yeah.
No, it's I'm gonna use this slide as justification why I should all move in with Ted down to Florida.
And that's 1 hour of scanning. That's 1 hour of scanning.
Yeah, no, again, impressive, Jaakko. And again, part of, I think, especially when dealing with larger point clouds too, and this is very interesting, is also talking a little bit about the realm of augmented reality and virtual reality too. And I think, Greg, that's some key areas you have your expertise in.
Yeah, so just I want to comment, we've kind of transitioned from a lot of the site collection over to the processing and 3D modeling. I quite honestly believe that the site capture is a little bit kind of the easy part of the process. Not necessarily easy, it's definitely critical to the process, but the time and amount of effort that goes into it is significantly more on the processing and 3D modeling side than it is on the site capture. So having good data on the front end really enables good process and information downflow from that. So definitely investing in time in that and having a good baseline. As I mentioned before, things don't get more accurate as they go, they get less accurate. So the better baseline you're starting with, the better off you'll be. So this really just speaks to kind of getting out of the box a little bit, doing things like you might be 3D modeling something and you might have a lot of utilities in a space, but to check the work, instead of just visually looking at it, like run a clash detection, because if you do have a duct running across a pipe, we know it can't be built that way, or at least should not be built that way. So kind of going through that and using some of these other tool sets. Another great one is VR. It doesn't necessarily have to be a point cloud, but reviewing your 3D model in VR, walking the space, putting yourself in human perspective inside that space, I guarantee you will find like another 25% of errors in that process, just looking at that data in a different way. You know, and of course, there is software out there. I wouldn't say it's wide ranging, but there are several vendors, ClearEdge being one of them, but a Scan-to-BIM verification software, right? These tools will help you in this process identify those things that you're not going to find otherwise. Just like clash detection, you can do that manually. You can go through step by step, but if you can automate some of these things, it will, you know, definitely be better than just the human eye. So think about implementing these things.
Yeah, no, again, it's a unique world and there's a lot of new tools out there. Just for the record, we did not pay Greg to plug us. Totally kidding about that. But, you know, coming back, I think it's one of those things, everyone wants these large point clouds, large data. You know, how do I digest this, you know, using tools like augmented reality? But again, it's a very critical thing of talking about how do we make sense of these giant data sets for optimization. Jaco?
Yeah, I actually found this by coincidence one year, that producing a point cloud in a certain spacing and doing the edgewise processing on that with the same spacing actually speeds up the program quite a bit. And when you're visualizing that, for example, here, and when you're visualizing the data, point normals do wonders. So that's the same building in both pictures, but the colors are a bit different. The other one doesn't display normals, it's just a colored point cloud. The upper one is with normals. The other, lower one also has the 3D modeling done, but if it's a little bit visible on the windows. But yeah,
I think we have another example right here too.
Yeah, we have another example here. So optimizing those clouds. So do we really, in this, when we're trying to map out the crown points and the concrete on the ceiling and everything, do we actually need 209 million points? Because we can produce the same amount of accuracy by just cutting down and making and eliminating as much points as we can without losing the accuracy and detail. These are the exact set from the exact data set, and those pictures actually have those there. You can see it on the lower one a little bit, so there's a little bit of spacing there. But this 42 million point cloud is much easier to process, and you can send that. It's a few gigabytes only, and it's still the same data is there. So have that. These are usually done by just processing, and you don't have to actually manually do anything. So it's all calculations and math. So just take that time and let that PC hum.
Yeah, no. Everyone wants to have 500 million points until they actually get to work with 500 million points.
Yeah, but use the 42 million point set for the modeling and where you're going to need to fiddle with it a lot. And when you're going to the recap, for example, using the recap in Revit, maybe put the denser cloud in there, so you get a lot of more resolution in there when you're doing the finalizing of the product. So because that doesn't take, you don't actually, it's a lot easier to handle there.
Yeah, no, and to that end, you know, though, if I place a 500 million point cloud in front of like a project team, you know, they're probably going to look at me like I have 3 heads. And to that end, you know, I think Greg talking a little bit about actually what do we provide from this whole process over. Yeah,
so this is a bit of perspective of it. I found in the industry that not a lot of providers do this, but it's really, it's basically empathy, having empathy for your clients and what the processes they're going to go through. So what's going to happen if you're dealing with an architect or an engineer, or sometimes builders, is you hand over your data set, your 3D model or your point cloud. What's going to be the first thing that they do with that information? If I'm an architect, I'm going to cut a floor plan, right? I'm going to look at that information in the format that I'm used to looking at it. So what we try to do is develop that floor plan and make sure that that floor plan fully makes sense, right? We don't start to see gaps between elements or things that aren't square or straight. We try to make sense of that with respect to, like, what does an architect expect to see? Or what does a HVAC engineer expect to see when they're looking at this information? And so to help that process along, we'll develop that documentation. It may not be to like something you can build to that it's like fully documented telling someone how to build this object, but at least provides it in a format that the vast majority of people are used to looking at it. And then the other thing that this helps do is once we create that documentation, our floor plans tend to be kind of a deliverable that we also use to communicate the information about that building or that facility that we start to notice things are off. You can see at the bottom of that page like a color, it's basically a elevation mapping of a floor. So we start to point out things like, hey, in this particular area of the building, the floor is not flat. So you might want to consider you're going to need a leveling coat in there as you go to rehabilitate this space. And they start to appreciate those things, but we have to find a way to communicate it. And we don't always get the opportunity or the chance to say, hey, let's have a meeting and talk about the things that we found during our modeling process. So we have a deliverable, we type those things up, and then we do also try to have a handover meeting talking about those things, and then they can hand over those deliverables to the rest of their staff and say, hey, you know, it was fantastic. The team found these additional items that we didn't expect in here, and now we can take those into context as we go to rehab this facility that we weren't even aware of. Like, this is extra bonus. So they really appreciate those extra little tidbits, you know, going into it. It's not a surprise. Like, hey, for some reason this door is swinging the wrong way. Am I going to question it, or did we prove it? You know, those kinds of things in there, you know, really pays dividends in building trust with the clientele.
Yeah, perfect. And I know it is 2 o'clock. We got a few more slides, and again, great information. So appreciate if everyone, you know, if you got to go, you got to go. But by all means, stick around with us. Like I said, we got a few more slides to cover. But to that end, you know, one of the other things really focusing on is a little bit about, and I love the way Jaco put this, accuracy versus elegance.
Yeah, they don't always go together. A data set can look good, but once you get into it, you start noticing the little things that it's not as accurate as it's supposed to be. So it looks great. Obviously, this data is both amazing and accurate. So it's accurate and elegant. But to achieve both of these things, you need to think about in which state of the project you're doing this. So let's say you're doing colorizations on point clouds from the terrestrial scanner. You run the filters before the colorization. So are you coloring all of the points, or are you coloring the part that's left out after cleaning? And this affects, depending on the program, this affects the coloring process. So a good example of this is when you have a person walking by your scanner, and he has a vest on, a bright vest. If you colorize the cloud with the full data, the points in the vest, the color goes in those points. But if you delete that person and do the colorization, the color goes to the wall behind him. And do you want a person's image walking in the wall? No. So think about those, and what are the trade-offs, especially in this. So what do you gain and what do you lose? So are we gonna worry about those colored vest points? No, because we don't want that. And yeah, thinking about, because it's always finding out that you processed a lot of data, and then you find out these things in the end product, and then you need to circle back and do the whole thing again. And it really just, again, in this profession, like being professional, and okay, the points are accurate, but they're wrong color. It's a white wall with a yellow stripe in it. Yeah, it's still the wall and it's accurate, but it's not elegant anymore. So
I like to throw out a comment on that one. So sometimes, yeah, it feels unprofessional to do that. Like, you don't want to be caught in that scan and then having that happen. Other times it's fun to produce that, and you billboard yourself across, you know, an entire building, you know, with that colorization of the point cloud. We've been known to do some of that. Of course, not to corrupt the data or do something funky, but sometimes it's good to have a little fun on the job too.
Yeah, I have a nice collection of people doing scans in my folders.
And again, I've had my own fun moments too, hiding myself in scan data, but you know, boo, little Easter eggs. But part of that too is also, you know, while scanning is really also collecting the field notes, you know, and for that, again, Ted.
Yeah, the field notes, again, probably not something totally new, but it continues to be key, right, to success. And I've had to stop myself from jumping in so many times earlier, because I think it all ties together into this. The field notes that you're using out there, or that you're producing out in the field, are going to be imperative when you get in, you start modeling, especially if it's not the person that was out there scanning. In a lot of cases, the data gets acquired, then it gets turned over into registration, then it goes into modeling. And by the time it gets there, there are things that have happened out in site or strategies for the registration that have changed. And the note taking is the only way, right, for that to really get done well. Some of the basic things in field notes that I look for are scan counts. Similar to Greg saying, let's make sure that you don't leave anything on site. The checklists, love that, do that too. But write down how many scans were in each cluster, right? Or how many scans you did in this room, or I had to break here and I had to come back, but these are the scan, names that you're going to see in each one of those locations. The other thing that we like to do is date and time, right? That we're out there, any environmental conditions. Was it raining? Was it snowing at the time? Was there a huge temperature swing? I've had projects where you start in the morning and you finish in the afternoon. And by the time, the data is all converted, it's like, why is this building bigger? And it's bigger because it hasn't been tensioned yet, right? And maybe it warmed up and the steel expanded, and there's a lot of expansion that can happen in a building. So by having those kind of notes about the temperature, the date, the time, right, they are things that then go into what Greg mentioned, turnover document, right? You got to have a turnover document of some sort when you're going to be delivering this. Things as simple as like, where did you assume an elevation? If you're not using survey control and they tell you just, use 100 feet for the finished floor, great. But we just saw the finished floor that moved all over the place. So where did you pick that 100 feet? Where's that going to set? And how's that going to impact the rest of the project? So just even including that when we were out there has saved me on countless occasions. Somebody says, hey, your model's missing this and we're not seeing it in the scan. We're like, we don't know why. Well, it didn't get installed until the week after we were out there, right? But we can now refer back to the dates because it's a month later. Also, important positions are critical. A lot of those come into like, hey, this particular scan is observing some of those artificial reference points, right? Maybe we are doing cloud to cloud. We're not going to need these, throughout the whole thing, but we're tying into them as a backup. Which scans have them? It just makes the whole process faster when you're back in the office. Let me see, what else? Visualize conditions. Yeah, even when you're the person out there, I can't tell you how many times I've gone out and scanned a project and then gotten back in the office and I've done maybe 2 more projects in between that time and I can't remember why I did what I did, right, without those notes. So yes, the field work is easy. Big shout out to all the hardware manufacturers out there that have made it so much easier than it was a decade ago. But let's take advantage of that extra time we have, and instead of cranking up the resolution and getting a 10 million points for every laser scan data, let's take a little time to make some notes while we're out there and go old school, because it's going to save you back in the office.
Well said, Ted. Well said. Actually, speaking of the manufacturers, and Clearidge included, another fun topic, and this is one that I feel like a lot of people miss or take for granted, is a little bit about file formats. Woo.
Yeah, this has been my trailblazing also, that when you're working with so many different professionals, so architects, mechanical engineers, you name it, geological surveyors, everything, it all boils down to how do we exchange this data? So how do we talk to each other? Of course, we talk, but how does our data talk to each other? So knowing what programs other people use and what formats they take in. An E57 is a simple format for us, but for example, some software producers miss a certain column data on that file, and some programs don't bring it in because of that missing column data. And IFC models, we produce a lot of those, but they need optimizing. You need to know what you're exporting and how big those files are going to get, how they're going to look, and where they're going to be imported and used. It's not always the same. So as simple as doing architectural 3D design work in two softwares and trying to exchange data between them, it might be impossible. So think about those, and find out about those restrictions and limitations on this. And where do you lose data? Because you lose some of the data in the exchange if you don't do it right. So making BIM models with all the necessary information about building itself, and then you send out a model that has the 3D model, but it's a plank otherwise. So it's not a good handout, that one. And I found this on one of our latest projects, is that step might be a little outdated. It's that I produced this model with my team, and the file sizes went way over 1 gigabyte. And this is about 3,000-4,000 objects. And doing the exact same project as an SAT format, it was sent over email. So, and it actually imported better into other programs. For example, this particular one used SolidWorks as their design base, and it actually imported them as SolidWorks parts rather than external references to a step model or mesh models. So there's a lot of programs that provide those free trials. So just find out. So there's not a list. There's a lot of talk on the forums and the internet, but there's not a list for this. There's no compatibility list, and even if they list those, they might still not work. So try those out beforehand and find out that you don't want to mess this up on the handout. So do you want to drop the 3D model?
No,
Yeah.
definitely. And it's one of those things, again, all the vendors probably need to get together and we can finally make an industry standard format for everything, Yeah. That would be a dream. But regardless, one of those things too is also managing, I think the key thing is you're not going to get a nice little email with the model, but sometimes to the client, what are they actually expecting, Greg?
All right, just kind of closing things up here. As you deliver these products, just think about what other extra value that you can provide. Especially for those folks that are out on site or building these 3D models, you'll see things within these facilities and buildings that may be relevant to the client. So this image on the right is an example where as we were pulling things together, we noticed that the floor wasn't flat, right? This was something that we were trying to figure out where the elevation was for each floor. It's like, wow, it looks like this particular area of the building just seems to be off on every level. So to help tell that story, provided a 3D graphic, did a little extra time in there to try to pull graphics together that kind of told everything all together. And the client was just extraordinarily appreciative, right? This wasn't something that they asked for or said, hey, as part of your delivery, can you do some graphics for us to help, tell these others why we need more money to do this particular thing, right? You start to hand that over and do it in a way that they don't have to put extra work into it to tell that same story. It just becomes super appreciated, and then, they're certainly going to build that trust with them as well. And then, on that same note, when you do this, you can do fly-throughs, you can just do quick screenshots. I mean, any number of things. People find this stuff very interesting, right? We do these things day to day and get a little bit bored with them. Like, yeah, it's okay, it's all right. And everyone's like, oh man, that's so cool. So when you hand off this information and provide it in a way that they can pass on to their friends and their colleagues, like, hey, look at this thing we just had this group do for us, right? It starts to drive a lot of interest and excitement. And even though you may not find it as exciting, they do. So like pass that on, do some graphics, do a little bit extra. And it's just, I use it too much in this presentation, but it pays dividends.
And again, I think that's kind of the key things. And again, Ted, to highlight that, being intentional with the project handover.
Yeah, the turnover isn't the last step, right? Like even if you have great documentation and you've got a full report that goes along with it, it should be the point at which now you're concerned about their success with the data. We talked about past experiences. I've had situations where we've done great work on a project. We turned over a fantastic deliverable that I couldn't be any more proud of, only to run into the client at a conference 6 months later and, happy to see him. Hey, how's everything going? Said, oh, it didn't work at all. Like, what are you talking about? It didn't work at all. He said, well, we didn't get to use it until 2 weeks after you turned it over. And when we did, just the way that it was formatted or something didn't work. So we just went and went down another route. It was just a waste. Like, why didn't you call us? Well, we were too busy with something else. Like that happened one time. That is the last time that ever happened, because it wasn't that we didn't meet the expectations of the contract or the scope. It's that again, some of these pieces that we've been talking about this whole time fell apart. We didn't find out who the end user was because we didn't know that that's something we should do yet, right? We executed the contract, but we didn't also then follow up afterwards and say, hey, have you started using the data a week later? And giving them a chance to say, no, we haven't started yet. Okay, I'm going to set a reminder, call them in another week. Then you find out, oh, well, I didn't like the way that that was formatted. Well, guess what? I could hit a button and export it in a different format that's much more usable for you. Now you've had a successful project and you don't have to run into that person 6 months later and find out that, you know, woulda, coulda, shoulda, and it wouldn't have cost anything, right? So that's when you do that as well, you're able to start talking about the cross-selling, upselling. You know, you've met the expectations for the project, but like Greg showed there, like, oh, look at what's happening with your floor. Did you also know that we could do floor flatness reports, right? Because what I've done is a quick graphic, but if you want something more official, we have additional information. Or do you want to understand how that's impacting interstitial? Because we did some scans up there, and I know that we can extract these elements of the trusses. So now you could potentially expand that, add more value to the project, but also, you know, gain a little bit more scope and fee for the project.
No, perfect. And again, I think that's a beautiful way to wrap up. And speaking of that, you know, what are we delivering to you guys, our webinar audience? So that basically concludes our webinar. To that end, I know we're a little bit over time, so we'll actually take questions through email. So I know Chris has been quite dutiful answering questions over in the QA pane. Any other additional questions, you know, feel free to email us at ClearEdge3D. Any questions, we'll make sure our panelists get it, and we'll get those answers back to you guys. Like I said, the webinar will, the recording link will go out, so that way everyone will have that. And again, don't be a stranger. Feel free to ask us anything. We're always here to help. Again, all in the industry together. And so I guess, you know, with that, on behalf of ClearEdge3D and our panelists, thank you guys so much for joining us for our webinar today. And again, enjoy the rest of the day. Stay warm out there and happy modeling.